Okay, welcome to this video. Let's continue with producing response, error codes and types in general. Now, I want to mention again that this is very important when it comes to planning and developing really professional RESTful APIs, especially if you want to make them public. You know, because it is like always in software development, you can get started pretty easy, but if you want to be very professional, there are additional information and steps you need to make. And making an API documentation, which gives really detailed information about what error responses are getting produced from a specific endpoint and which information you're getting delivered, is really important when it comes to professionality. Now, as I already said, right now here at find, and the same goes for search, we simply return that 404 not found here in find and an OK 200 status code if we have a flight. But there are still two sides who can fail. There's the client side and the server side. For example, client-side connection or server-side connection from backend to database. Now, in that scenario, we can go ahead and add two more attributes again. Produces response type here, produces response type. And then we can simply go ahead and say 400, which is bad request. We can copy it over, paste it again and say 500, which is internal server error. So this, the client side has sent an invalid request, okay, client side, and 500 here, the server has received the request, but was not able to process it. For example, due to a failure in the database connection string, for example, right? So this goes here, let's copy them both. Also for the search endpoint, because here the client side could fail and the server side could fail. So as you can already guess, most stuff for 400 and 500 appeals to every endpoint in your entire API. For now, let's simply start the application. When you open up Flight ID, for example, you can see that we now have 500 server error, 404 for not found, you can see it here, and we got that bad request, and none of them is undocumented. And 400 and 500 are completely new at all. Now let's take a look at the other flight endpoint. You can see that we also here have now 400 and 500. So just by adding those two new attributes, we have now in our documentation those response codes listed. If you want to go ahead and make that a little bit easier or increase the readability, for example, you can simply go ahead, copy that lines of code, both of them for sure, remove them totally, and if you want to make them available for all your endpoints, you can go ahead and add those attributes directly to the controller. So you could go ahead and say it like this, produces response 400 and 500. So you should only add that if you want to have that really documented in your API, for example. So 400 and 500, that would be pretty easy and reasonable to add, but for 200, for example, for status code 404, that wouldn't make sense for every endpoint, because not every endpoint is, for example, for finding data. If you have an endpoint for posting data, then a 404 not found wouldn't really make sense. Now let's take a look what happens if we restart the application. You can see that when I open up the endpoints, we still have those responses defined or documented here. So you can see this is also working. For now, I will remove them again and bring them directly to the actions itself, so not based here on the class, right? So the attributes, I will assign them to the methods and not to the class. Great. So if you get confused by, well, copy, pasting, etc., take a look at day 8 in the GitHub repositories commit. Now, in our documentation, you may have noticed that we have response like 400, 500, 400, 404, 500. But what about some documentation about an OK, so a success status code like 200, right? That would be one of the most interesting ones, because then another developer knows, okay, if I make a successful call, I will receive a response which looks like this. But right now he cannot see it. Right, because he will maybe not even be able to try it out because he has no access or whatever to try it out now, but maybe he still wants to build it and use it later on or whatever. But if I would be a front-end developer now and I got that API documentation, I would say, okay, how would a potential successful response look like if I make a GET request on flight with an ID, right? So What will I get? I have no idea. I just know about 400, 404 and 500. So we should also take care about, okay, if you make a successful call, your response will look like this. And we can definitely make that very easy. In our project, go ahead again and add, who would have guessed, right? A new produces response type. And this time we go ahead and say type of. Now we simply add the type of actually the return type we want to show, right, in the response. So type of flight read model, and then we add the status code, which is 200. Now this is all we have to do. We go ahead and copy that, and we will go ahead and also do that here at search method, right? Because here the response type is also flight read model, but it's an IEnumerable. So we go ahead and do that. Take the IEnumerable flight read model, paste it in here because that's the data type that we want to return. Now let's save and take a look again. When we now open the endpoints, you can see that we now have a documentation for response code 200 success, and you can see an example value right here. So for sure this goes for both of them. And now our documentation is already delivering a lot of more information and value to other developers who have absolutely no clue about how our API is working, right? Great. So now you have become a better backend developer because you have understood the importance of documenting your API. We are building RESTful APIs because we want to deliver an interface for other programmers or for ourselves to write a program that connects to that API. And documenting is incredibly important, especially if you want to go ahead and find a job as a software developer, or if you are a software developer and you want to write professional APIs who are getting used by other developers, right? So you want to be a professional and not a beginner, and documenting RESTful APIs is definitely something what professionals are doing. Now, this is the side of backend, right? Or when it comes to response types. Now let's switch the side to client side and let's take a look on how we can handle those errors when it comes to Angular, for example.